by Writers, the stories that made us who we are.
And here we are again, the end of this particular road, because it is episode 10, the final episode in the series of Raised by Writers. Don't worry, we'll be back next year, but we've got lots to pack in today as well. Two fantastic guests for you. Mary Bowen is going to be here talking about a book from the Read for Empathy collection in just a little bit. And then what a finale. We're going to be having Hannah Gold talking about her books, talking about the books that she read as a child, and also a little bit of a special announcement as well. Hold on to your hats. We're going in. And so we start with my book recommendation for this week. Now, unfortunately, it was with a sad heart that we talk about the loss of Brian Patten this week. Now, Brian Patten was, of course, part of the Mersey Sound. He was very much, of course, some of you may know him from The Scaffold, that wonderful song, Lily the Pink, which always brings a smile to anybody's eyes. But, of course, was an amazing poet alongside people like Roger McGough. And well, Brian's book Gargling with Jelly has stayed with me for years. Gargling with Jelly was a collection of poems, and you know, if you look on it on the surface, it's your usual collection of kids' poems. There's sort of superheroes there with crazy different powers. There's kids with weird eating habits. There's lonely caretakers, unhappy ghosts, some fantastical creatures, the usual thing that you would find. But within this book, there was also a wonderful poem called The Children's Fallout Shelter. Now, this is a poem that's got special significance for me on lots of reasons. Number one, loved it when I read it. Number two, it became, when I was doing GCSE dance, it was one of the things that we were asked to do was create a dance for our coursework around a poem. And it was this particular poem that I choose. It was a very dark poem. It's about some young children who were placed in a fallout shelter when a nuclear apocalypse was happening, and they were saved from it. And these three children grew up as time goes on, but were not allowed to leave the shelter, so they couldn't go and live their dreams. And it talks about what their dreams were, just like any other children. So one of them wanted to go off and travel, and obviously can't. One of them wanted to be a hermit, and can't, because there's two other people there with them. And it goes on until the last part of the poem was very much about them being old people reflecting on their lives. And you think, well, they haven't had lives, they've had an existence. So it was a really big poem for me in terms of understanding that, you know, you've got to go and live life, you've got to go and be out there. And Brian Patten over the years has brought so much joy to so many people, and I can't think of a better poem. And also one of the poems that, you know, it showed to me that you can have an amazing book full of ridiculous characters and silliness, but you can also have those moments of tenderness. You can have those moments that are a bit scary. You can have those moments that are a bit dark as well. Brought so much joy to me, Brian Patten, and his book Gargling with Jelly is my choice for the bookshelf this week.
And so we come to our guest talking about the Read for Empathy collection. Now, you will be forgiven if this sounds like a familiar voice, because if you were listening to episode 2, our teacher guest that week was Mary Bowen from Swansea, who is talking about, in that particular section of the podcast, about a book that she really does remember about teaching. And I think you talked about Elmer, but actually I completely negated the fact that you're also a massive key part of the Empathy Lab team yourself, as a trainer for the schools programme that Helen was on talking about last week. Mary Bowen, welcome back to Raised by Writers.
Diolch yn fawr, thank you very much. Lovely to be back here with my different head on, with my Empathy Lab head on. So I am very fortunate to live the best life where I'm now teaching supply, so part-time, and I'm also working for Empathy Lab and training schools and spreading the empathy message across schools, which is wonderful.
And look, I've been in the room with you when you've been sort of talking to those schools about the empathy skills and the way that they can approach books and reading. Teachers really do engage with the empathy program because of the fact that actually it's a nice, simple kind of refreshing of things that they're already doing, but with this brand new focus, isn't it?
Absolutely. I can remember I can remember the first time having that sort of penny drop moment, thinking, I want to go back and I want to use that book again, because I would use it so differently. Because so often I'd focused on plot or just that little one thing that was in the story, and I'd really missed out on those characters within those stories, what those characters were thinking, what those characters were feeling, really understanding them. The book that stands out in my mind for that more than anyone is Michael Morpurgo's Friend or Foe, which we used to use when we looked at the evacuees, and really looked at what an evacuee was. But I want to go back and I really want to look about what that evacuee felt, how that mum felt. And because it's Michael Morpurgo, and he describes it so beautifully, the way the mum stood on that railway station, how that mum would have felt saying goodbye to her child, not knowing whether she would have seen him again. So, yeah, I want to go back and I want to use that book again.
And this is the thing with talking to you, Mary, is that, we start on an idea and we're going to talk about one book. But actually, there's about 9 books I could talk about.
I know. I'm sorry.
And we have got lost in many a conversation in the past about, and what about this one, and what about this one? But there is a particular book from the Read for Empathy collections that really does stand out for you, isn't there?
You've heard me talk about this so many times, and I'm utterly obsessed with it. I think it is wonderful. It's Race to the Frozen North, Catherine Johnson. It's just my go-to book every time in training, because I just think it's wonderful. It can be used. It could be used year 3 to year 9. You could use this to frame a year's worth of work within a school, because it's the rich, powerful writing in it, and based on the true story of Matthew Henson, the explorer, who was the first person to reach the North Pole, but it wasn't until posthumously, till after his death, it was recognised he was the first person because of his colour. And it's in society today, when we look at the society we live in today with everything that's going on, and it is a book that resonates with today as it did then. It's just it's just so beautifully written. It's a Barrington Stoke book. It's dyslexia friendly. It's more than anything, it's reader friendly. As a reader for pleasure book, as a book for your curriculum, for your topic, your theme, whatever. It's just wonderful. I absolutely adore it.
And of course, Catherine Johnson was a guest on the podcast earlier in the series, and we spoke to her about it and her reasons for writing it. But actually, you've got that kind of nice two other angles that you've had, in that you've been talking to teachers about it and opening their eyes, but also you've had the chance to teach this book to children as well in the classroom. And how do children feel when they come to Matthew Henson's story, and what's their reaction when they find out about it?
It's because from the word go, when you with Matthew, with this story, he escapes, he runs away from his stepmother, who's just beyond cruel. So children are sort of hooked with this story from a few pages in. They're hooked, and they want to make sure that Matthew's safe. And then I think the thing as well with him is his age, what he went through at such a young age, and the children are sort of really like, that's younger than that. That's just only a bit older than me. That what he goes through, and then what happens to him on that journey, and to become the explorer he becomes. Children can't believe that actually what he went through. And then when they realise, when it sinks in that this is a true story, this actually happened to somebody. And again, through the story, because not only have you got the empathy running through it, but you've got friendship. Matthew learns to trust. His perseverance, his respect for his captain, is so many things for children, and those rich discussions that you can have with children as they learn more about what's happening to Matthew, that you can have, and as a children then begin to sort of jump into his story. That's the phrase we used last year, wasn't it? To jump into somebody else's story, to jump into his story and understand how difficult his life was, that because he persevered, he wasn't going to let that stop him. And he had such respect for his commanding officers that he didn't what happened to him, he let happen to him. It was just sort of accepted, which thankfully would never happen now. We wouldn't allow that to happen now.
It is, and there's lots of talk in schools at the moment about resilience, particularly as a skill and as a life skill. And actually, the perseverance and like you said, the tenacity of Matthew Henson's story, I think is a massive. That's yet another way to look at it. I mean, you could, as you said, curriculum-wise, you could look at it from a science point of view in terms of polar exploration. You could look at it from a geography point of view, history. There's just so many different ways that you can create an engaging lesson. Just
climate change now. You could even sort of look at it from looking at that now, and then looking at climate change and the effect that's having, and what would that race to the frozen north look like now? Because it would look very different. It would be a lot easier now, wouldn't it?
Well, I think you've definitely sold me on it, and I'm almost certain that our listeners will as well. This also means, of course, that you've been a teacher guest, and now you've been an Empathy Lab guest as well. To get the Monopoly set, you're going to have to write a book and come back as an author guest. Is that okay?
The book is up here. I just getting the confidence to be able to put it down on paper. I know exactly what the book is going to be about, but it's just that confidence, and I will get there one day, and then I can come back and do my third.
And for those of you coming to this through the auditory medium, Mary did just point at her head. That's where the book is currently. So it will need to be, committed pen to paper or type it up, one of the two. But by what, series 4, series 5, we could probably have a book there for you.
We could have a book there. We will try. We'll aim for that. We'll go for that.
Mary Bowen, thank you so much. Race to the Frozen North is going to join our Empathy Lab bookshelf for the end of this series.
Diolch yn fawr, Paul.
And so, for the final time this series, it's time to welcome our author guest. Now, she started her career working in films and magazines before she turned her pen towards becoming a writer of children's fiction. Her debut novel, The Last Bear, won the Waterstones Children's Book Award and the Blue Peter Book Award as well. The Lost Whale and Finding Bear followed. And then, of course, Turtle Moon, her latest book, is receiving widespread critical acclaim. The Lone Husky is due for release this October. And alongside talking about film rights for certain ones of her stories, she's also been named as a World Book Day author with Bear Rescue coming in March next year. Hannah Gold, how on earth are you finding time for all of these things to be happening?
I think Paul, hello. It has been one of those bumper years of good news. I think as authors, you can go through like what I call like sort of quiet patches. And suddenly it's like buses, all these good news come at once. So that's where I'm at the moment. But yes, it has been extraordinarily busy, which is why you don't see me out and about that much, because I'm always at home beavering away
on the keyboard. And I bet sometimes you think, was I writing about turtles or huskies or bears? I can't. Or maybe do they end up being mixed up? Maybe there'll be some sort of crossover story at some point or another, riding on the back of a whale.
I did try to suggest that. They were like, no, Hannah, it's a bit too soon for that. But in Turtle Moon, there is like a little cameo sort of reference to a couple of the characters from Lost Whale, which is like an Easter egg for my favourite readers. And when they sort of pick up on that, they really like that. So I think there's no Easter eggs really in Lone Husky because it's a continuation of like the Apron and Bear story. But maybe in the next book, which is... I won't talk.
You can't talk about that just yet. We shall hold back. I almost had her, everybody. I almost had her. Now, look, welcome to Raised by Writers. We do talk about the books that we read as children. I've recommended another one from myself this week, and you've chosen 3 fantastic books for us to talk about. Now, tell me roughly in history and in geography, where were you and whenabouts were you reading the books that you've chosen?
So I grew up in the 80s. Back in the age, I don't think they would have had the categories that we have on children's books now, as like picture books, middle grade, YA. It was just children's books back then, I believe. I remember very vividly that my primary school had a library, probably something I took granted. We had like reading sort of time every Friday afternoons. My mum and my grandmother were like huge readers. So all of that was such a part of my culture. When we look at today and the sort of scarcity of libraries, you sort of realise, wow, no wonder I've been shaped the way that I was. So that was my landscape. And I grew up in a town called Tring in Hertfordshire. And if some of your listeners might be aware, there's a really fantastic independent bookshop in Tring called Our Bookshop in Tring. And so I often do things with them, thanks to thanks to the fact my roots are there. Yeah.
So, you had the full whack of library, school library, independent bookshop. It was there at your fingertips. And this is where these books came in. Now, you almost cursed me when we were off air to say that I have not read a stalwart of children's literature, in that you've chosen Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Neem, right? Or Nim or Neem?
Nim. I say Nim, but I mean, people might say Neem, but I think I'm pretty sure it's Nim. NIMH. Yeah.
And so you're going to have to fill me in on the story of these rats. Are these good rats, bad rats? Are they superhero rats? What kind of rats are these?
I mean, I cannot believe you don't know the story, because anyone that's read this considers it a stalwart gem.
Okay.
So this is the film. There was a film as well, like a Disney film or a Universal Pictures film, it says here, which I don't think was as good as the book, but this is like the film sort of cover. And it's about a family of rice. A
family of rice? Excellent.
Yeah. A family of mice, even.
Let's go with that.
The mum being Mrs. Frisby. So Mr. Frisby has deceased, and she has this dilemma, and this is how the book starts, that she's got this son who's a bit poorly, and the field is about to be ploughed where she lives. She can't move her nest because the son's too poorly to move, but she can't stay where she is because, oh my gosh, the plough might destroy her.
It's major trauma in this. Am I ready for this?
Yeah, that's just the opening chapter.
Okay.
And then basically she then has to get some help, and people tell her you have to go to the rats.
Oh,
and the rats we see are these super intelligent rats. And then when she goes to get help with them, she discovers some backstory about her husband, which she knew nothing about. And we also then understand the extraordinary history of the rats, who are basically these lab experiment rats and gone on to be like amazingly intelligent. So what I love about this is that actually you've got a book within a book. So we start off with Mrs. Frisby, and then we then dive into the rat's backstory, which is the middle part of the book, which is fascinating. And then we go back to the denouement of, can the rats help Mrs. Frisby? And there's some other jeopardy as well in there. It's amazing.
There is, and there are some great sort of literary traditions of the story within the story. The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar is the one that kind of sticks in my head. It starts off one way, and then you go, he finds a book and tells a story about a guy telling a story, and then you don't get. It's almost like Inception levels, so you don't know whether Christopher Nolan's been involved somewhere. Did you find it hard to track when you were younger? Or did it just immediately leap out on the page for you?
No, it's really easy to follow, because, when she goes to the rats and she goes into their lair, she meets the sort of, I think it's Nicodemus, who's the sort of the head rat, and he sits down and literally tells the story. So that section becomes the story. But I just find it really interesting, because she didn't know that her husband was involved, and how they kind of became like how people misconstrue what rats are, like dirty, venom. And actually in this particular sort of narrative, they're intelligent, they're kind, they're cunning, but they're just they're decent rats. They're decent rats.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of intrigue there, and a lot of kind of hidden mysteries to kind of come out all the way through. And interestingly as well, animals that have been kind of misrepresented as one thing or another. We might come back to that in just a little bit, because I think this is going to become a theme. Because
my through line.
Well, indeed, because we were talking about what your middle book was. Now, this is a book that, it's kind of a book that's come up throughout this series, in that it's been referenced by another writer that we've had on the podcast. It's been chosen, or one of the books of the series has been chosen by one of our teachers. But you're the first author to say, yes, a whole series of books, the Narnia series, absolutely key to your reading when you were younger. I'm assuming you couldn't just decide and couldn't go Lion the Witch on the Wardrobe or Silver Chair or whichever. It's got to be the whole lot.
If I had to pick, Paul, it would actually be The Horse and His Boy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Right.
which is I think it's book 3 in the series. It's a lesser known one. I don't think it was ever adapted. And what I really like about that is because it actually has a completely different sort of viewpoint on the overarching story. So most of the others feature one of the 4 children in some way or another. But this one, we only ever see a couple of the main protagonists from afar. It's told from the point of view of the boy whose name I can't remember, and it's and so it's kind of his journey, and I don't know, I just find it, you just get this in terms of the world building. It's almost like a standalone story, so you get this interesting window into this world of Narnia that we wouldn't have seen before. And I don't even think the boy features again in any of the other stories, but I really like it.
Well, it's interesting for me that you say about that particular book, because I never read at school. I didn't read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe until I was much older. I read it when I was an adult, in fact. But we had a teacher at the school in my 3rd year in the junior school who'd read us Prince Caspian as a kind of standalone, assuming, I think, that, well, everybody's read Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, you'll understand entirely. And actually, as standalone stories, they work perfectly fine, don't they? You don't have to know the world, but you can just dip in, which is a work of genius.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so fond on, like, The Last Battle. I think that's probably the weakest one of the lot. And obviously there's issues with it looking back with this sort of a modern day lens. But I think that's the same with a lot of books of my era. But for me, in terms of as a child reading them and just conjuring up this whole imaginary world, it was just so eye-opening. And that whole, I don't know which other, almost every child back then would have wanted to step through their wardrobe and discover Narnia. And I know I tried many times, So that whole idea, and I'm still slightly disappointed that Narnia doesn't actually exist.
This is the thing, is that I, as somebody who's read just the briefest part of, a third of the series I've read, I have a view of what Narnia is, and it's become part of our psyche, our national psyche, our culture. Everybody, even if they've not had any contact with the books, they know about the wardrobe, and they know about the witch and the snow and the animals snow. And all of those things.
The lamppost,
exactly. They're iconic now. Do you take stuff like that and think, you've spoken about your books, there's kind of odd moments of crossover and characters that reoccur. Do you think that's become part of the building blocks for your writing? You've taken that kind of world building and thought, actually, all of these animals you've written about have sort of coexisted within, our world?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think deep down I'd love to write Narnia, because Narnia is obviously a fantasy story, and mine, although sometimes you have like a sleight of hand, particularly in The Last Bear, because it's not realistic for a girl to become best friends with a polar bear. They are much more rooted. They are much more rooted in real life. But I think the whole idea of writing about animals and creating like really atmospheric settings and having kind animals is probably at the heart of what I do. And I suppose in some sort of childhood sort of way that would have linked back to perceiving Narnia as a kind world, and a world where animals were friendly, and the sort of the enemy would have been the humans, rather than the animals.
And they do. They coexist. There are moments of trauma. There are moments of real sadness within the books as well. But also, actually, but by the time they finish, there's a real sense of hope in all of them. And I think with your books, certainly with Last Bear and Finding Bear, with Lost Whale, there's this sense of things are going to be just that little bit better at the end. And that's such an important message for young people with regards to climate change, the environment, all of those things. To have that positive message at the end is going to be key, isn't it, for us going forward?
Yeah, and I think so. Like, I think what I really like actually is a kind of a bittersweet ending. And going back to Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Lynn, that it has kind of quite a bittersweet ending, and that's one of the reasons why I really like it. And I think when I was writing Last Bear specifically, and I think in a way we can say that's got a slightly bittersweet ending, because we go through this massive emotional journey together where April forms this really deep bond with this wild polar bear. But to do the right thing, she needs to sort of let him go. And so there's that sort of heartache at losing your best friend, coinciding with this feeling of like, well, I've done the right thing and now I'm integrated back into the family. So I like those kind of endings as well. But yeah, it is really important to put hope and agency and empowerment, I think, into all children's books, because you want the person reading it to think, well, I can be that person and I can be maybe 1 or 2 steps bigger or braver or kinder than who I am right now.
And it's almost a kind of, the ideal is that we, in this podcast, in 30, 40 years time, we're hoping, fingers crossed, that kids are looking back on your books and going, blimey, did you see what they used to do to the environment? Almost as if it becomes alien to them. We want them to become dated. I don't want to put the mockers on your career, but I'd love for your stories to become moments of the past, if that's possible.
That would be really, because it's unbelievable what humans are doing to the planet. And so you would think like aliens looking on, or a future kind of like version of ourselves would be like, well, how could they just disrespect their land and their sort of their fellow animals to this degree, But I know it's not everyone, it's mostly, but I think that's a good point.
But this is the thing, is that, just like in those Narnia stories, you've got that kind of sense of majesty and the sense of wonder of just what is out there. And to take it right back, you've gone for a fairy tale as your sort of final choice. Now, was this in? I'm fascinated to know in what form this fairy tale came to you. Was it told to you? Did you have a book version of it? And you've gone for the ugly duckling.
Yeah, I looked for it before we started because I've still got it somewhere, but it's not on that bookshelf. But for me, because it's such a simple story, but it's so powerful. And again, talking about books which become sort of sayings, I think The Ugly Duckling, what came first, that whole idea of, was it the story that came first, or was it the saying that came first of an ugly duckling? I don't know. But I don't know. I think for me, when I think, and I shared this today in a post, a sort of a throwback post of 5 years ago when I got my book deal for Last Bear. And before, we look at like my success at the moment, like the film deal and, the World Book Day. And I feel like I'm doing really well at the moment. But there's a period of time before I was a writer where I was struggling, where I never thought it would happen to me, where I got rejections for the books I wrote previously. I remember distinctly crying on my husband's shoulder thinking, it's not going to happen. It's going to happen to somebody more talented, funnier, edgier than me. And I often thought I'm too sentimental as a writer. I'm too sort of, soft. I'm too simple. So that context of being an ugly duckling, I think exists in adulthood in many different ways. And it's not visually. It's this feeling of not belonging or not feeling like you can become your true potential. And I think that's why I still reference it, because I very, very distinctly remember being the metaphor of the ugly duckling before any of my book success happened. And then when you grow into the version of the swan, it's almost unbelievable that people look at you differently. But deep down, you're still the same person.
I think it is one of the most misread fables that we have, in that lots of people go, oh, it's a story about beauty and that you'll all become beautiful in the end. It's that kind of facade. And it's not. It's about that. It's about the feelings of the duckling, is it? That imposter syndrome, the anxiety of I'm different to everybody else. Why? And actually, we all just take that time to bloom and blossom into the version of ourselves that we're going to become. Whether that looks like...
And some people take longer than others. I got my book deal in my mid-40s, and then some people get their book deals like literally when they're 21. And it's like, just because it doesn't happen to you straight away, it just means that your journey to get there is more interesting.
Yeah, you've got more to write about than these people.
Yeah, it's more like that. You've got, your lane is your lane, and you've got to trust that your lane is the right lane. And that's trusting your fledgling feathers growing maybe slower than somebody else's. And so when you finally sort of shine and everyone looks at you a bit differently, it's like, well, it was in them all along. It just took a while to get out.
So these books that you've chosen, and this is what we've been trying to get to at the bottom of this series, is about where the line is drawn. Where do you think the line is drawn between the books that you read affecting how you wrote later on, and actually, were you drawn to these books because they contain things that actually I want to read about? Because there's that difference between the kind of lure of books and how we come to them, and the sort of things we do read, and then what we produce later. I think we're finding it's inextricably linked in some way. How do you feel about looking back and going back to these stories and going, you know what, actually, it's no wonder I think like this or write like this?
I think one of the things, the pieces of writing advice that we always hear is write about what you love. And I suppose as a child, I loved animals, like in real life and in book form. We always had animals at home, like cats and a dog, and my grandparents had ducks. I wasn't allowed a duck because we didn't have a pond. Quite disappointed by that. Didn't understand the concept of that they needed a pond. So it was a natural extension, I think, to then go on to write about subjects which feature what I love, being the reflection of the books I loved as a child. I think somebody before me who did it really well is obviously Michael Morpurgo. And I remember when I was writing Last Bear, kind of thinking, well, who writes animal stories? Because animal stories have always been what we call the heartland of middle grade, but they kind of go in and out of fashion. A lot of people are writing the most fantastic animal stories at the moment. It's not just me. But back then, it was kind of one of the biggest ones was Michael Morpurgo. And I thought, well, if he can do it, I can do it. So it is, yes, write about what you love. And I think what you love is a reflection of the books you read as a child. And that is just comes from what you loved back then anyway. So what you loved back then is what you still love back now. If that makes any sense.
Absolutely makes sense. And also there's that feeling of you carry it with you. You know, you still have, when somebody mentions The Ugly Duckling, I'm almost certain that you are transported back to when you were reading it. And, you know, when you were, I mean, people can't hear, they can hear it, but they can't see it on the podcast. We might put a snip up on the socials. But when you held up the cover of your Mrs. Frisbee book, there was a real sense of, this is mine. I've had this since I was little. I mean, I've no idea. I found one the other day that's got, you know, to Paul, Merry Christmas 1980, Love Mummy and Daddy in it. And suddenly I was like, oh, thank you very much. This came out my stocking.
Yeah.
It's those memories are so, you know, immediate when they come flooding back to you.
I think this book is it's really old. Some of the pages are falling out. It's a 1982 edition, this one. So yeah, I would have been 8 years old.
Yeah.
I love going into charity shops actually and seeing finding books that have got the dedications in them. And I wonder, you know, who was the sort of the Jacob or the Derek or somebody that had a book that ends up in there from Granny and Grandad. That's a little quirk of mine, reuniting people with their books that have got lost in charity shops. But yes, yeah, your old little book is, you know, I'd never throw it away.
No, I opened one of them the other day and found Gilgrove Junior School, and I was like, oh, blimey, I think I stole this. Oh, dear. So it's a bit late to take it back now, about 30 years later. But, you know,
you could try and then see what they say.
I'll give it a go. Thank you so much for joining us today. Look, what we always ask, what can you tell us? Because you sort of teased it just a little bit. World Book Day. I mean, that's a massive thing that's coming up. The Lone Husky is a big thing that's coming up. We talked about film that's coming. Yeah. Where do you even start with what 2025, 26 is going to be like for Hannah Gold?
It is an exciting landscape ahead. You know, we've got The Lone Husky coming out October, Bear Rescue, which is a standalone book, but part of the Bear universe. So you can read it completely separately, obviously as part of World Book Day. The film, which is being distributed and financed by Studio Canal, the makers of Paddington. Move over, Paddington. There's another bear in town, I say. They say that they're going into filming next year, but I'm not sure. I mean, things like that can change, but, you know, that would be very exciting. And there is one other piece of news. This is hot off the press.
I'm sorry. Have we got an exclusive on our podcast?
We have. We are going to be having a picture book of The Last Bear.
Now, that sound, and you heard, listeners, was my jaw dropping. That's what it was.
Yeah. And this is really, really an exclusive. It's not being illustrated by Levi Pinfold. We decided we wanted to do something a bit different.
Right.
Okay, wait for it.
Okay, right. I feel like I was already sitting down, but carry on.
So we've got the lovely Tom Percival, who's illustrating the picture book of The Last Bear.
Oh my goodness gracious me. Tom and Hannah, that's it. United in bear form.
Dream team.
That's a book and a half. That's it. Okay.
Isn't it?
And this is the picture book version of Last Bear, right?
That's the picture book of The Last Bear. And that at the moment is probably we're talking before it's been announced, but the announcement is coming next week as part of like a big book deal for me.
Sure.
And in that is the picture book news. Don't tell Tom.
I won't tell Tom that we've told you. You told me.
And then he's done a couple of rough drafts, which look sumptuous. I love Tom because he's so on it. He's so amazing. He's a great person, a fantastic illustrator, a wonderful storyteller, a really lovely person. And so I've seen a couple of spreads, and it looks stunning. And obviously he's got his own interpretation, which is lovely. I think it's spot on. And I think we're looking at that. It's not next year. The publication date's still to be decided. But that's the next.
But
nice
it's coming.
Bit of news.
It's coming down the line. And what a great team that you're going to make. Thank you so much, Hannah. Your books, Mrs. Frisbee and The Rats of Nim, the entire Narnia series, and The Ugly Duckling will take their place on our author's bookshelf for the rest of eternity. And thank you so much for joining us. We'll speak to you very soon.
Thank you, Paul. It's been a pleasure to be here, and a big thank you to the listeners too for being part of this amazing community.
And so we've reached that point in the series where we're coming towards the end of things, and probably a bit of a time to reflect. Now, you would usually be hearing from a teacher at this point, and we have heard from so many teachers over the course of the podcast, people reflecting on the books they read as children. And what has really surprised me is that the books that teachers were reading at the time, some of those books, there seems to be a general kind of consensus of the fantasy tales. There's been a lot of C.S. Lewis, there's been a lot of Enid Blyton. There was that really sort of general sense of escapism, whereas now children's books are vastly different, very, very different sort of narratives, and lots more characters, a lot more representation in books nowadays as well. It really did surprise me as well, the number of authors. Enid Blyton came up a huge number of times in our selection of 10 authors, as did C.S. Lewis, as did Dr. Seuss, really almost staples of libraries and throughout the years. And but there was also some wonderful gems as we come through, some biographies that people read, books from different cultures that I'd never heard of before, and has given me the chance to go and find those books out. Also, anecdotally, and lots of people sort of finding from the books that they'd read, there was a real sort of general, almost anecdotal sometimes, but very much a kind of idea that the books that they read sort of helped them to become the person they became. I'm thinking right back to the beginning of the series when Jo Cottrell was talking about reading a book set in a theatre when she was younger, and she went on to become a drama teacher and then run workshops and do festivals. I'm thinking about SF Said in last week's episode, talking about his cat as a child and how it was a real sort of friend to him as an only child. And actually, all of his books have gone on to feature a cat or an animal or a fantastical, mystical adventure in some way. Carl Nova talking about really passionately about the books that he read as a young man, and actually, thinking about those, understanding the biography of Malcolm X, and then thinking about how he wanted to portray work in his poetry and his hip hop work. It's all of those examples are just really fantastic for me to see that books really do have that indelible ink upon our lives, and a book that we read 30, 40 years ago will still stay with us in years to come. The other thing, of course, about this pod is that we've really focused heavily on the Read for Empathy collection. Double Rainbow, who produced this pod, are very, very strong supporters of Empathy Lab, and it's if you do get the chance, go and check out the collections. Do take part in the Empathy Day Festival. There's Empathy Action Month coming up in November as well. There's a whole lot of work to support there, and mostly as well teachers. There's a huge amount of research around the link between empathy and reading. And of course, empathetic classrooms are places where academic achievement, reigns supreme. So it's one of those places that I really do recommend to teachers that you go and check out. We've got this week our books that we've featured on the pod this week are Gargling with Jelly by Brian Patten. That was my choice for this week. Catherine Johnston's Race to the Frozen North. That was Mary's choice for this week from the Empathy Lab collection. And then the brilliant books from Hannah Gold. Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nîmes by Robert O'Brien, the entire Chronicles of Narnia series by C.S. Lewis, and then, of course, The Ugly Duckling, a tale by Hans Christian Andersen. It's been an absolute delight to spend these last 10 weeks with you. We'll be back January 26 with more adventures on Raised by Writers.
If you'd like more information on today's podcast, you can contact Paul Jenkins on social media using the handle @TeacherWriterPJ. Raised by Writers is a Double Rainbow production.